Admiral Catherine Blake stood at the viewing port of the USS Liberty and watched the massive space station grow larger as they approached. Kepler Prime was a neutral station built specifically for diplomatic meetings between different species. The station looked like a giant wheel spinning slowly in the darkness of space with lights twinkling along its rim like stars. Catherine had been serving in the human fleet for 20 years and had never seen anything like this. The Zephyrians had agreed to meet for peace talks, which was unusual because they were known for solving problems with weapons rather than words. Their species looked like walking crystals with sharp edges and glowing blue eyes that seemed to see right through a person. General Marcus Cole walked up beside her carrying a datapad filled with negotiation points. He was a tall man with gray hair and serious eyes who had fought in 3 different wars. Marcus always looked worried about something, but Catherine knew he was one of the best military minds humanity had ever produced. Admiral Patricia Stone joined them at the viewing port. She was younger than both Catherine and Marcus, but had earned her rank through brilliant tactical decisions during the Outer Rim conflicts. Patricia had short black hair and spoke in a calm voice that made everyone feel safe even in dangerous situations. Captain Ryan Murphy stood near the bridge entrance, watching everything with careful eyes. He was responsible for security during this mission and took his job very seriously. Ryan had fought against space pirates and alien raiders for years and knew how quickly a peaceful situation could turn deadly. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant sat at her communication station monitoring all incoming messages. She was a skilled operator who could speak 5 different alien languages and had helped negotiate several smaller peace treaties in the past. Lisa wore her brown hair in a tight bun and rarely smiled, but everyone knew she was completely dedicated to her work. The USS Liberty moved slowly toward the docking bay of Kepler Prime. The station was enormous with multiple sections for different species. The human section had artificial gravity and atmosphere that felt like Earth, while other sections were designed for aliens who breathed different gases or lived in different temperatures. Catherine looked at the tactical display showing Zephyrian ships positioned around the station. War Commander Kethval had brought a large fleet, which seemed strange for a peace meeting. The Zephyrian ships looked like sharp crystals floating in space with weapons that could cut through any known armor. Marcus checked his datapad one more time. The Zephyrians had been expanding into human space for months and several colonies had been attacked. Thousands of humans had died and many more had been forced to abandon their homes. This meeting was supposed to end the conflict before it became a full war. Patricia studied the sensor readings showing the Zephyrian fleet movements. She noticed they were maintaining battle formations even though this was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting. Something felt wrong, but she could not identify exactly what was bothering her. Ryan received a message from the station security team. Zephyrians had already arrived and were waiting in the main conference hall. They had brought a large delegation, including several war commanders and their crystal-powered weapons were secured according to treaty requirements. Lisa established communication with the Zephyrian delegation. War Commander Kethval spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding glass. He said his people were ready to discuss terms for ending the conflict and establishing new borders between their territories. The USS Liberty docked successfully and the human delegation prepared to board the station. Catherine wore her dress uniform with all her medals and ribbons. Marcus carried his ceremonial sword that had been passed down through generations of military officers. Patricia brought her datapad with detailed proposals for peaceful coexistence. They walked through the station corridors toward the main conference hall. The walls were made of a smooth metal that reflected their images as they passed. Other alien species watched them with curious eyes, and some nodded respectfully to the human officers. The conference hall was a large circular room with a high ceiling and seats arranged around a central table. The Zephyrians were already seated, and their crystalline bodies reflected the room lights in strange patterns. War Commander Kethval sat at the head of their delegation with his blue eyes glowing brighter than the others. Catherine took her seat across from Kethval and felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The future of human colonies depended on these negotiations? Marcus sat to her right, reviewing his notes while Patricia took the seat on her left with her. Datapad ready, Ryan positioned himself near the wall where he could watch all the exits. He noticed that the Zephyrian guards were standing in specific positions around the room. Their placement seemed more tactical than ceremonial, which made him uncomfortable. Lisa activated her translation equipment and began recording everything. For the historical record, the first diplomatic meeting between humans and Zephyrians would be studied for generations. Regardless of how it ended, War Commander Kethvil stood and began speaking in his grinding voice. He said the Zephyrian Empire had come to discuss the future of human expansion in their region of space. His words were polite, but his tone suggested he was not interested in compromise. Catherine responded by outlining the human position. She explained that the attacked colonies had been settled legally according to Galactic Federation law, and that humans were willing to discuss reasonable solutions. Her voice remained calm and professional. Despite the tension in the room, the negotiations continued for several hours with both sides presenting their positions. The Zephyrians demanded that humans abandon 12 colony worlds and restrict their expansion to specific sectors. Catherine countered with proposals for shared mining rights and joint defense agreements. Marcus noticed that the Zephyrian guards had moved slightly during the discussions. Their new positions would give them better control of the room if violence erupted. He caught Ryan's eye and nodded slightly to indicate his concern. Patricia was reviewing casualty reports from the attacked colonies when she noticed something strange. The Zephyrian attacks had targeted military installations first but had avoided civilian populations. This was unusual behavior for a species known for total warfare. As the formal ceremony began, War Commander Kethvil activated a device that looked like a small crystal. Catherine thought it was part of their traditional diplomatic protocol until she felt a strange tingling sensation in her head. The neural disruptor weapon was invisible and silent but deadly effective. It sent out waves of energy that specifically targeted human brain chemistry. Catherine felt her thoughts becoming confused and her vision starting to blur. Marcus tried to stand, but his legs would not respond to his commands. The weapon was designed to attack the neural pathways that controlled movement and consciousness. He fell forward onto the table as his body lost all coordination. Patricia managed to reach for her communication device, but her fingers could not grip it properly. The neural disruptor was shutting down her motor functions one by one. She collapsed in her chair as her nervous system failed completely. Ryan drew his weapon but found that his hand was shaking uncontrollably. The neural disruptor affected all humans in the room simultaneously. He watched helplessly as his commanding officers died in front of him. Lisa tried to send a distress signal, but her equipment had been jammed by Zephyrian technology. She could only record the final moments as the three highest-ranking human officers convulsed and then became still. War Commander Kethvil stood over the bodies of the dead humans and activated his communication system. His message was broadcast across all human space within minutes. The Zephyrian Empire demanded immediate surrender or promised to hunt down and kill every human military officer in the galaxy. The diplomatic massacre was complete, and the Zephyrians believed they had won the war before it truly began. The emergency signal reached Earth exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes after the massacre at Kepler Prime. President Maria Santos was reviewing budget reports in her office when her communication system activated with the highest priority alert code. The red lights flashing across her desk meant only one thing, and she felt her heart sink as she accepted the transmission. Captain Ryan Murphy appeared on her screen with blood on his uniform and exhaustion in his eyes. He spoke in a voice that shook with rage and grief as he reported the deaths of Admiral Catherine Blake, General Marcus Cole, and Admiral Patricia Stone. The neural disruptor weapon had killed them instantly, while he and Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant could only watch. Maria felt the weight of leadership settle on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. She had been president for 6 years and had always hoped to avoid major conflicts during her term. The loss of 3 top military leaders in a single attack was the worst disaster since the colony wars. 20 years earlier, she activated the emergency protocols and called for An immediate meeting of the surviving military command. The secure conference room deep beneath the Capitol building filled with officers who had been pulled from their duties across the solar system. Their faces showed the same mixture of shock and anger that Maria felt burning in her chest. Major General Paul Hayes entered the room with quick steps and a grim expression. He had been attending a military conference on Mars when the attack occurred and his transport ship had broken several speed records. Getting back to Earth, Paul was now the highest-ranking surviving officer in the human military, and the responsibility showed in his tired eyes. Colonel Susan Park took her seat at the conference table with a data pad full of tactical assessments. She was known throughout the military as one of the most brilliant strategic minds of her generation and had predicted that the Zephyrians would eventually resort to treachery. Her warnings had been dismissed as paranoia, but now proved to be entirely correct. Commander Jake Thompson joined them from the Outer Rim, where he had been fighting space pirates for the past year. Jake had more actual combat experience than anyone else in the room, and his scarred hands showed the price of that knowledge. He brought reports of Zephyrian ship movements near human colonies. The Zephyrian ultimatum arrived while they were still discussing response options. War Commander Kethville appeared on the main screen with his crystalline face reflecting the cold light of his command ship. His voice ground out the terms like broken glass as he demanded total human surrender within 72 hours. The message was clear and simple. All human military forces would stand down immediately and report to designated collection points. Any resistance would result in the systematic execution of captured human officers. The Zephyrians had studied human psychology and believed that the loss of clear leadership would cause immediate collapse. Major General Hayes listened to the ultimatum with growing fury. The Zephyrians had violated every rule of diplomatic immunity and murdered 3 officers under a flag of peace. Their demand for surrender was an insult to every human who had ever worn a uniform. Colonel Park analyzed the tactical situation with her usual precision. The Zephyrians had positioned fleets near 12 major human colonies and were demanding the evacuation of all military personnel. Their strategy was based on the assumption that humans would choose submission over annihilation. Commander Thompson reported that Zephyrian forces were already moving against Outer Rim installations. Several mining operations had been attacked and their security forces overwhelmed. The aliens were backing up their ultimatum with immediate action against vulnerable targets. President Santos made the decision that would define the rest of human history. She authorized Major General Hayes to assume supreme command of all human military forces and gave him complete authority to respond to the Zephyrian threat. The normal chain of command was suspended and all officers would report directly to him. The response began immediately as Hayes activated emergency protocols that had been prepared for exactly this situation. Every human military unit received orders to ignore the Zephyrian ultimatum and prepare for total war. The message was simple and direct: humanity would not bow to alien murderers. Sergeant Amy Nelson was working the communication station at a military base on Alpha Centauri when the orders came through. She had enlisted after her brother was killed in a pirate attack and had worked her way up through the ranks with determination and skill. Amy looked at the message for a long moment before activating the base-wide communication system. Her voice carried across the base and was recorded by automatic systems for transmission to other installations. Amy spoke without notes or preparation, but her words came from the heart of every human who had heard about the massacre. She said that the Zephyrians had made a terrible mistake by killing their leaders because now every human would become a soldier. The message spread across human space faster than any official communication. Amy's words were repeated on every colony, world, and space station until they became a rallying cry for the entire species. The Zephyrians had expected submission, but instead they faced a population united in rage. Captain Helen Wright commanded the destroyer USS Vengeance when the Zephyrian fleet approached her position near the Titan mining facilities. The alien ships transmitted the surrender demand and ordered her to stand down immediately. Helen looked at the tactical display showing enemy vessels that outnumbered her 3-1. She opened a communication channel to the Zephyrian fleet commander and spoke in a voice that carried across the void. Between their ships, Helen said, that her people did not negotiate with murderers and that the Zephyrians would have to take her ship by force. The USS Vengeance powered up its weapons and prepared for battle. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Davis received the surrender ultimatum while inspecting defensive positions on the colony world of New Detroit. The Zephyrian ground forces were already landing and demanding that all human military personnel report for processing. Steve looked at the alien shuttles descending from orbit and made his choice. He activated the underground communication network that connected resistance cells across the planet. The system had been built during the colony wars and had never been used for its intended purpose. Steve sent out a simple message that reached every human settlement. The war had begun and there would be no surrender. The Zephyrians had studied human history and believed they understood how the species would react to the loss of leadership. They had seen other races collapse when their command structures were destroyed and expected similar results from humanity. Their analysis had missed the most important aspect of human nature. Humans did not fight because their leaders commanded them to fight. They fought because they chose to fight for things they believed in. The murder of Admiral Blake, General Cole, and Admiral Stone had not removed human leadership, but had created millions of new leaders who would never accept defeat. Dr. Linda Foster was working in her laboratory on Earth when the news of the massacre reached her. She was a xenobiologist who had spent years studying alien species and their technologies. Linda had always been fascinated by the Zephyrian crystalline biology and had published several papers on their unique physiology. She immediately began analyzing everything she knew about Zephyrian technology and biology. The neural disruptor weapon that had killed the human officers was based on their crystalline communication systems. Linda realized that the same technology that made them powerful also made them vulnerable. The 72-hour deadline was approaching when Major General Hayes called a final meeting of the military command. The Zephyrians had expected an answer to their ultimatum, but instead they were getting something entirely different. Humanity was preparing to teach them why diplomatic murder was the worst possible mistake. Colonel Park presented her analysis of Zephyrian fleet positions and identified their weaknesses. The aliens had spread their forces across multiple systems to intimidate human colonies, but had left their main command structure exposed. Their confidence had made them careless. Commander Thompson reported that resistance networks were active on every occupied world. The Zephyrians had expected to find defeated populations ready for processing, but instead, they faced coordinated guerrilla warfare. Human civilians were supporting military operations with supplies and intelligence. President Santos received reports from across human space showing that the ultimatum had been universally rejected. Not a single human military unit had surrendered, and colonial governments were organizing their own defense forces. The Zephyrians had succeeded in uniting humanity against them. The deadline passed without any human response to the surrender demand. War Commander Kethville waited for the expected communications from defeated human leaders, but his receivers remained silent. The lack of response was an answer in itself, and he began to realize that his analysis had been completely wrong. Major General Hayes finally sent a message to the Zephyrian fleet. His words were recorded and broadcast across the galaxy so that every species would understand what humanity had become. He said that the Zephyrians had taught them that mercy was weakness and that humans were very fast learners. The age of human restraint was over, and the galaxy would never be the same. Major General Paul Hayes stood in the war room beneath the Capitol building and looked at the tactical display showing Zephyrian forces positioned across 17 star systems. The aliens had expected human surrender, but instead they faced something they had never encountered before. Hayes was about to make a decision that would echo through galactic history for generations. He activated the secure communication system that connected him to every human military commander in known space. The faces of officers appeared on screens around the room, and Hayes could see the same cold fury in their eyes that burned in his own heart. The time for measured responses and proportional retaliation had ended with the murder of 3 leaders. Under a flag of peace, Hayes spoke in a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. He declared the doctrine of wrath, which would govern all human military operations from this moment forward. The rules of engagement that had limited human warfare were suspended indefinitely. The Galactic Federation guidelines for civilized conflict were no longer binding on human forces. Colonel Susan Park stepped forward with her datapad full of tactical assessments and strategic recommendations. She had been working without sleep for 48 hours developing what she called the Hydra Protocol. For every human leader killed by the Zephyrians, 100 alien command structures would be eliminated. The mathematical precision of revenge would be demonstrated across the galaxy. The new strategy abandoned every principle of proportional response that humanity had followed for decades. Park explained that the Zephyrians had introduced a new level of warfare by murdering diplomats, and the human response would match their escalation. There would be no sanctuary for alien leaders and no mercy for those who had shown none. Dr. Linda Foster presented her analysis of Zephyrian biology and technology to the assembled commanders. She had discovered that the crystalline communication network that connected their forces was also their greatest weakness. The same frequencies that allowed them to coordinate across vast distances could be turned against them with devastating effect. Linda had developed a computer virus that would infiltrate the Zephyrian network and cause their crystalline implants to resonate at lethal frequencies. The weapon would turn their greatest strength into an instrument of their destruction. She had named it the Resonance Cascade and had tested it successfully on captured Zephyrian equipment. Commander Jake Thompson volunteered to lead the first strike using the new weapon. He had been studying Zephyrian ship movements and had identified 3 command fleets that were coordinating attacks on human colonies. The simultaneous elimination of their leadership would send a clear message about the cost of diplomatic murder. The USS Reaper was a stealth ship designed for special operations behind enemy lines. Thompson took command of the vessel and loaded it with the equipment necessary to deploy the Resonance Cascade virus. His crew consisted of volunteers who had all lost friends or family members in the Zephyrian attacks. Lieutenant Sarah Mills was the ship's communication specialist who would be responsible for infiltrating the alien network. She had studied Zephyrian technology for years and understood their communication protocols better than anyone else in the human military. Sarah had also lost her sister in the attack on New Detroit and wanted revenge. Captain Tony Clark commanded the destroyer USS Fury and provided escort for the mission. His ship carried conventional weapons but also served as a relay station for the virus deployment. Tony had served under Admiral Stone before her murder and took her death as a personal betrayal of everything he believed about honorable warfare. The strike force moved through hyperspace toward the Zephyrian fleet positions. They used routes that avoided the main shipping lanes and approached their targets from unexpected directions. The element of surprise was essential because the aliens would undoubtedly have countermeasures ready. If they detected the attack, the first target was War Commander Vethran, who commanded the fleet attacking the mining colonies in the Vega system. His crystalline dreadnought was the center of a formation that included 12 heavy cruisers and 36 escort vessels. The entire fleet was linked through the communication network that Foster had learned to exploit. Thompson brought the USS Reaper to within transmission range of the Zephyrian fleet without being detected. The stealth systems worked perfectly, and Sarah was able to establish a connection with their communication network. She uploaded the Resonance Cascade virus and watched as it spread through their systems like digital plague. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The crystalline implants in every Zephyrian officer began vibrating at frequencies that tore their bodies apart from the inside. War Commander Vethran screamed as his crystal exoskeleton shattered and his internal organs were liquefied by the resonance waves. The alien fleet lost all command and control within minutes as every senior officer died simultaneously. The surviving crew members had no idea what was happening or how to respond. Their ships began colliding with each other as panicked pilots tried to escape the invisible weapon that was killing their leaders. The second target was War Commander Kethvos, who commanded the fleet blockading the human colony of New Sparta. His forces had been demanding the evacuation of all civilians and threatening to bombard the planet if their orders were not followed. The colony had refused to surrender and was preparing for siege warfare. Sarah infiltrated their communication network with the same ease she had shown at the first target. The resonance cascade virus spread through their systems and began its deadly work. Kethvos had time to realize what was happening before the frequencies tore his crystalline body apart. The third target was the newest and most dangerous Zephyrian commander. War Commander Kethmol commanded a fleet of experimental ships equipped with improved versions of the neural disruptor weapon. His forces were approaching Earth itself and had transmitted demands for the immediate surrender of the human government. Thompson pushed the USS Reaper to its maximum speed to reach the third target before they could attack Earth. The timing was critical because Kethmol's fleet was already in the outer solar system and could reach the planet within hours. Sarah prepared the virus for immediate deployment as soon as they came within range. The resonance cascade struck the third fleet just as they were preparing to attack the human homeworld. Kethmol was in the middle of recording a surrender demand when his crystalline implants began vibrating. He died screaming as his body was torn apart by the very technology that had made his species powerful. The simultaneous destruction of 3 command fleets sent shock waves through the Zephyrian Empire. They had never faced an enemy capable of turning their own technology against them with such devastating effect. The humans had learned to fight with weapons that the aliens could not defend against. War Commander Kethvol received reports of the massacres from the few surviving ships that had escaped the attacks. The humans had killed thousands of his best officers using a weapon that attacked the very foundation of Zephyrian civilization. Their crystalline communication network was now a liability rather than an advantage. He immediately attempted to contact the human leadership to propose new negotiations. The neural disruptor attack had been intended to force quick surrender, but had instead triggered a level of warfare that threatened the survival of his entire species. Kethvol realized that he had made a terrible mistake in underestimating human determination. Lieutenant General Chris Morgan received the communication request from the Zephyrian fleet commander. He had been promoted to replace one of the murdered officers, carried the weight of that responsibility in everything he did. Morgan looked at the aliens' request for negotiations and felt only contempt. His response became legendary throughout human space and was recorded for the historical archives. Morgan told Kethvol that the Zephyrians had taught humanity that mercy was weakness and that humans were very fast learners. There would be no negotiations with murderers and no sanctuary for those who had violated diplomatic immunity. The doctrine of wrath was now in full effect, and the galaxy would learn the true cost of betraying human trust. The Zephyrians had started a war by murdering diplomats, but they were going to lose it, because they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Colonel Park began planning the next phase of operations with the cold precision of a mathematician calculating equations. The Hydra Protocol called for the elimination of 100 alien command structures for every human leader killed. They had made a good start, but there was much more work to be done. Dr. Foster continued developing new weapons based on Zephyrian biology and technology. The resonance cascade was only the beginning of what human science could accomplish when motivated by righteous anger. She had ideas for weapons that would make the neural disruptor look like a child's toy. The transformation of humanity was complete and irreversible. The species that had once advocated for diplomatic solutions and proportional responses had become something that would show no mercy to those who showed them none. The galaxy would never be the same after witnessing what humans could become. When their trust was betrayed, the Zephyrians had wanted to break human resistance by killing their leaders, but had instead forged them into an instrument. The war had spread across 17 star systems like a disease that consumed everything in its path. Human forces no longer fought according to the rules of civilized warfare, but had embraced tactics that horrified even their allies in the galactic Federation. The transformation was complete and irreversible as humanity showed the galaxy what total war truly meant. Captain Jennifer Stone stood on the bridge of her modified fighter and looked at the tactical display showing the Zephyrian patrol fleet ahead. She was Admiral Patricia Stone's daughter and had requested permission to form a special squadron dedicated to her mother's memory. The unit had been equipped with experimental quantum torpedoes that could phase through enemy shields. The Wraith squadron consisted of 12 pilots who had all lost family members in the Zephyrian attacks. They flew ships that had been painted black and carried no identification markings. Their mission was to strike terror into the hearts of alien commanders by appearing without warning and disappearing before retaliation was possible. Jennifer activated her communication system and spoke to her pilots in a voice that carried the same calm authority her mother had possessed. She reminded them that they were fighting for every human who had died under flags of peace and that mercy was a luxury they could no longer afford. Lieutenant Mike Johnson flew wing position beside Jennifer and checked his weapon systems one final time. He had been a cargo pilot before the war but had volunteered for combat duty after his wife was killed in the attack on New Detroit. Mike had learned to fly fighters with the same determination that had made him a successful merchant. Captain. The quantum torpedoes were Dr. Foster's latest creation and represented a breakthrough in weapons technology. They could phase through solid matter until they reached the target's interior where they would materialize and detonate. No known shield or armor could stop them from reaching their intended destination. The Wraith squadron approached the Zephyrian patrol fleet using stealth systems that made them invisible to conventional sensors. Jennifer waited until they were within optimal range before giving the order to fire. 12 quantum torpedoes phased through the alien ship's shields and detonated. Inside their command centers, the effect was devastating as the Zephyrian vessels were torn apart from the inside. Their crystalline hulls shattered like glass and their crews died instantly as the explosions vaporized entire sections of each ship. The patrol fleet was eliminated in less than 30 seconds without firing a single shot in response. Colonel Sam Rivers commanded the human fleet that was implementing the scorched space strategy across the border regions. His orders were simple and direct: destroy everything that could be used by the enemy and leave nothing behind that could support their military operations. The strategy abandoned all pretense of preserving civilian infrastructure or protecting neutral territories. Rivers had authorization to destroy entire star systems if necessary to deny them to the Zephyrians. The mathematical precision of total warfare was being applied across hundreds of light years. The first target was the Altair system where the Zephyrians had established a major supply depot. Rivers deployed stellar conversion weapons that would cause the system's star to go supernova within hours. The explosion would destroy every planet and space station in the system, while creating a navigation hazard that would last for centuries. Major Betty White commanded the ground forces that were evacuating human personnel from the doomed system. She had 12 hours to remove everyone before the star became unstable, and she worked with the efficiency of someone who knew that failure meant death for thousands of people. The evacuation was completed with minutes to spare as the last transport ships cleared the system boundaries. Rivers activated the stellar conversion weapon and watched as the star began to collapse under its own gravity. The explosion that followed could be seen from neighboring systems. The Zephyrians lost their major supply depot and learned that humans were willing to destroy entire star systems rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands. The message was clear: there would be no sanctuary anywhere in space for those who had betrayed diplomatic immunity. War Commander Kethville retreated to the fortress world of Kithathara with the remnants of his fleet. The planet was protected by massive shield generators and orbital defense platforms that had never been successfully attacked. He hoped to make a final stand there while negotiating some kind of peace settlement. General Hayes personally took command of the assault on Kithathara and assembled the largest human fleet in history. The siege force included 500 warships and 50,000 ground troops equipped with the latest weapons technology. There would be no escape for the aliens who had murdered diplomats. Admiral Tony Clark commanded the naval forces that established a blockade around the planet. His ships carried quantum torpedoes, resonance cascade weapons, and experimental devices that could penetrate the strongest known defenses. The siege would continue until the Zephyrians surrendered unconditionally. Colonel Sarah Williams led the ground forces that would assault the planet's surface once the orbital defenses were neutralized. Her troops had been trained in urban warfare and equipped with powered armor that could survive in any environment. They were volunteers who had requested the honor of ending the war personally. The siege of Kithathara lasted for 8 months as human forces systematically destroyed every defense the aliens had constructed. The quantum torpedoes phased through the shield generators and detonated inside the control centers. The resonance cascade weapons turned the planet's own communication systems against the defenders. Dr. Foster arrived at the siege with her latest creation, a modified version of the neural disruptor that had killed the human diplomats. She had reverse-engineered the weapon and improved its effectiveness against Zephyrian physiology. The aliens would die by their own technology turned against them. The weapon was deployed during the final assault on the planetary capital. The neural disruptor backfired when Foster's modifications caused it to target Zephyrian brain chemistry instead of human neural pathways. Thousands of alien operators died instantly as their own weapon was turned against them. Major Amanda Price led the final assault on the crystalline citadel where the Zephyrian High Command had barricaded themselves. Her battalion had fought through the ruins of the alien capital for 3 days and had lost many good soldiers to enemy resistance. The survivors were determined to finish what the aliens had started. The citadel was a massive structure made of living crystal that could repair itself and adapt to different types of attack. The Zephyrians had built it to be impregnable but had not considered weapons that could phase through solid matter. The quantum torpedoes made their strongest fortress into a death trap. Amanda led her troops through the shattered remains of the citadel and found War Commander Kethvil in the central command chamber. He was surrounded by the bodies of his officers who had died when the neural disruptor backfired. The alien leader was alone and defenseless as human soldiers surrounded him. Kethvil looked at the human soldiers with his glowing blue eyes and finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had killed 3 diplomats expecting to break human resistance but had instead awakened something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The species that had once advocated for peace had become an instrument of total warfare. He attempted to surrender and offered to negotiate terms for ending the conflict. Kethvil promised to withdraw all Zephyrian forces from human space and pay reparations for the damage his people had caused. He even offered to submit to trial for war crimes if it would end the fighting. Amanda looked at the alien commander with contempt and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of every human who had died in this war. She told him that surrender was a privilege that had to be earned through honorable conduct, and that diplomatic murderers had forfeited any right to mercy. The war ended not with negotiation but with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian military and the capture of their leadership. Every alien officer above the rank of lieutenant was executed for war crimes. The survivors were relocated to reservation worlds under permanent human supervision. The Galactic Federation attempted to intervene and impose sanctions on humanity for violations of the laws of war. Ambassador Kate Morris delivered the human response to the Federation Council. She explained that the laws of war had been suspended the moment aliens murdered diplomats under flags of peace. The Federation realized that humanity had fundamentally changed and could no longer be controlled by external authority. The species that had once been reliable allies and trading partners had become something entirely different. They were now a force that would show no mercy to those who betrayed their trust. The final battle reports showed the true cost of the Zephyrian mistake. Over 90% of their military had been eliminated and their industrial capacity had been reduced to primitive levels. The aliens who had started the war through treachery had learned that some species were too dangerous to betray. Human Forces began occupying former Zephyrian territories and establishing new colonies on worlds that had been abandoned by their previous owners. The expansion was systematic and thorough as humanity claimed the spoils of total victory. The war ended with the complete surrender of the Zephyrian Empire and the establishment of a new order that would reshape the galaxy for generations. Supreme Commander Paul Hayes stood in the ruins of the alien capital and looked at the terms of surrender that had been dictated rather than negotiated. There would be no mercy for those who had murdered diplomats under flags of peace. The Zephyrian military was disbanded permanently and their weapons technology was confiscated by human forces. Every piece of equipment that could be used for warfare was either destroyed or transported to secure facilities for study. The aliens who had once threatened human colonies were now completely defenseless. The surviving Zephyrian leaders were put on trial for war crimes at a special court established on the neutral world of Haven Station. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy so that every species could witness the consequences of diplomatic murder. Justice would be served publicly and without compromise, War Commander. Kethvil stood in the defendant's box and listened. As the charges were read against him, he was accused of violating diplomatic immunity, murdering 3 human officers under a flag of peace, and conducting illegal warfare against civilian populations. The evidence was overwhelming and the verdict was never in doubt. Judge Catherine Ross presided over the trial with the same cold precision that had characterized human warfare since the massacre at Kepler Prime. She had been appointed, specifically, for this case because her brother had been killed in one of the early Zephyrian attacks. Personal loss had taught her the true value of justice. The prosecution was led by Colonel Daniel Brooks, who had compiled evidence of Zephyrian war crimes from across 17 star systems. His presentation included recordings of the neural disruptor attack and testimonies from survivors who had witnessed the murders. The case was methodical and devastating. Kethvil attempted to defend his actions by claiming that the attack had been a legitimate military operation. He argued that the human officers had been valid targets because they represented the leadership of enemy forces. His lawyer tried to invoke the principle of military necessity. The defense collapsed when Colonel Brooks presented evidence that the meeting had been arranged under formal diplomatic protocols. Admiral Blake, General Cole, and Admiral Stone had been protected by Galactic Federation law, and their murder constituted a war crime by any reasonable standard. The trial lasted for 3 weeks and ended with the inevitable verdict of guilty on all charges. Kethvil was sentenced to death by the same method he had used against the human diplomats. The neural disruptor weapon would be used against him with the modifications that Dr. Foster had developed. The execution was carried out publicly and broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to any species that might consider similar actions. Kethvil died as his victims had died, but with the knowledge that his treachery had doomed his entire civilization. The lesson was clear and unmistakable. The Galactic Federation attempted to impose sanctions on humanity for what they called excessive use of force and violations of proportional response doctrine. The Federation Council met in emergency session and passed resolutions condemning human actions during the war. Admiral Ryan Murphy, who had been promoted to replace Admiral Blake, delivered the human response to the Federation Council. He stood at the speaker's podium and looked at the assembled alien delegates with eyes that held no warmth or compromise. His message would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Murphy reminded the Council that the Federation had done nothing to prevent the massacre of human diplomats or to punish those responsible. The aliens had remained silent when humans were murdered under flags of peace, but now objected when justice was served. Their hypocrisy was noted and would be remembered. He explained that humanity no longer recognized the authority of any organization that failed to protect diplomatic immunity. The rules that governed civilized behavior were meaningless if they could not be enforced against those who violated them. Humans would make their own rules from now on. The Federation realized that they were facing a species that had fundamentally changed and could no longer be controlled through political pressure or economic sanctions. Humanity had become something entirely different during the war, And there was no going back to the previous relationship. Ambassador Rachel Stone, Admiral Patricia Stone's sister, was appointed as the new human representative to the Federation. Her first speech established the principles that would govern human relations with the galaxy. There would be no compromise with murderers and no forgiveness for those who betrayed trust. She announced that humanity was withdrawing from all Federation military agreements and would no longer participate in peacekeeping operations. Human forces would protect human interests exclusively and would show no mercy to anyone who threatened them. The age of human altruism was over. The surviving Zephyrians were relocated to reservation worlds under permanent human supervision. The aliens, who had once been a major galactic power, were now wards of the species they had tried to destroy. Their fate served as a warning to anyone who might consider similar actions. General Susan Park, who had been promoted to oversee the occupation, established strict rules for the alien populations. They were forbidden from developing any technology that could be used for military purposes and were required to report all activities to human administrators. Freedom was a privilege that had to be earned through generations of peaceful behavior. The former Zephyrian territories were divided among human colonies that had suffered during the war. New Detroit received mining rights to 3 star systems, while Alpha Centauri was granted control of former alien trade routes. The spoils of victory were distributed according to the sacrifices each colony had made. Dr. Linda Foster continued her research with unlimited funding and resources from the human government. Her work on alien biology and technology had proven invaluable during the war and would be essential for maintaining human dominance in the galaxy. She was developing weapons that would make future resistance impossible. The memorial to Admiral Blake, General Cole, and Admiral Stone was built on the exact spot where they had been murdered at Kepler Prime. The structure was made of the same crystalline material that had been used in Zephyrian technology, but had been modified to create a monument that would last forever. Captain Jennifer Stone commanded the honor guard that maintained the memorial and ensured that no alien vessel could approach within 100,000 kilometers. Her Wraith Squadron had been expanded into a full wing that patrolled human space, looking for any sign of potential threats. The inscription on the memorial was simple and direct. It stated that the 3 officers had died seeking peace, but that humanity now lived ensuring it through strength rather than negotiation. The message was visible to any ship that approached the station and served as a reminder of the cost of betraying human trust. Human fleets patrolled the borders of their expanded territory with the same cold efficiency that had won the war. Every ship carried quantum torpedoes and resonance cascade weapons along with the newer devices that Dr. Foster had developed. The galaxy had learned to fear human technology. Commander Jake Thompson commanded the border patrol fleet that monitored alien ship movements near human space. His ships maintained constant vigilance and were authorized to destroy any vessel that showed signs of hostile intent. There would be no second chances for species that threatened humanity. The transformation was complete and irreversible as humanity established itself as the dominant military power in the galaxy. The species that had once advocated for diplomatic solutions and proportional responses had become something that would show no mercy to those who betrayed their trust. Other alien species watched the human expansion with growing concern and began modifying their own policies to avoid provoking similar retaliation. The lesson of the Zephyrian War was clear. Humanity was too dangerous to fight and too powerful to ignore. Trade agreements were renegotiated to favor human interests, while military alliances were dissolved or restructured under human leadership. The galaxy had a new master and everyone understood the price of resistance. Peace would be maintained through strength rather than cooperation. The final reports from the war showed that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had completely destroyed an enemy civilization and absorbed its territories, while suffering minimal casualties themselves. The victory was total and would serve as a model for future conflicts. President Maria Santos stood in her office and looked at the reports from across human space. The colonies were prospering under the new order and the military was stronger. than ever before. The transformation that had begun with 3 murders had created an empire that would dominate the galaxy. She activated her communication system and sent a message to every human world and space station. The words were simple but carried the weight of absolute authority. Santos reminded her people that they had chosen peace but had been given war, and that they had responded by becoming something their enemies could never defeat. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would echo through history. Humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers, but their ability to adapt and ensure that those who harmed them faced consequences.